Randy Stoltmann Wilderness area, indicated in red, has 4 intact old-growth forest valleys, as shown here. The numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 indicate Sims Creek, Clendenning Creek, the Ilaho Valley, and the Upper Lillooet Valley. The Stoltmann Wilderness is located in the southwestern corner of British Columbia. As this map indicates, the Stoltmann Wilderness is some of the last remaining wilderness in the Coast Mountains. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a hike through the Ilaho Valley along the Wilderness Committee's Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route. To access the trailhead, you drive up logging roads from Squamish to the end of the road at the Ilaho Valley. You then hike through the ancient forests and climb up to the 100 Lakes Plateau before descending down into the Meager Creek drainage. So fasten your hiking boots and let's begin. The Ilaho Valley is one of the gems of the Stoltmann Wilderness. This is where the Wilderness Committee has built our 28-kilometer hiking route, the wildest hiking experience in the southwestern corner of British Columbia. We're now going to move up through the forest on the right-hand side of the Ilaho Valley towards Meager Creek. You begin the hike from the end of the logging road, where you put on your pack and get ready to go. The Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route is easy to follow. Along the entire route, it's either marked with these easy-to-see orange diamonds, or on the 100 Lakes Plateau, where trees are scarce, you'll find rock cairns. After about 20 minutes of hiking, you'll come to the Ilaho Giant, the 3rd largest Douglas fir tree ever recorded. It's only minutes off the trail along the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route. Shortly after passing the Ilaho Giant, you come to Sundown Creek, a nice spot to stop, fill your water bottle, sit by the rushing creek, and rest a moment. Then cross the bridge and continue along the route. Shortly after crossing Sundown Creek, you come to the Three Sister Cedars, a lovely grouping of 3 cedars close together right along the side of the trail. 15 minutes past the Three Sister Cedars, you come to Serenity Creek, a peaceful spot, lovely waterfall, nice mossy rocks, good place for a pause. The second creek you come to is Lava Creek. This creek is spanned by one of the Wilderness Committee's first suspension bridges. Made of aluminum ladders, this bridge spans 60 feet across Lava Creek. Once you've crossed Lava Creek and climb up the steep canyon on the opposite side, you get wonderful panoramic views of the deep gorge in the Ilaho Canyon. Once you've climbed up out of Lava Canyon, you arrive at Lava Camp, a lovely campsite perched precariously over the intersection of both the Ilaho and Lava Canyons. From your tent at Lava Camp, this is the view. Looking over backwards back towards Lava Creek, you see this unnamed waterfall. After leaving Lava Camp, you come to the junction of the Douglas Fir Loop Trail. This 2-hour walk is a nice diversion off the main trail that takes you through a grove of ancient Douglas fir. In fact, along the loop trail, there's over 50 record-sized Douglas fir trees. Once you're back on the main trail, having hiked the Douglas fir loop, you continue on your way towards Impassable Creek. The forest is still beautiful. There's just not quite as many record giants along the route. The third creek we come to is Impassable Creek, aptly named because in high water, it certainly looks impassable. In the fall of 1996, Wilderness Committee volunteers went into Impassable Creek and put in the second of their suspension bridges built from aluminum ladders. This bridge is spectacular, nearly 80 feet long. It spans the entire gorge of Impassable Creek. After crossing the bridge at Impassable Creek and climbing up the steep slope on the opposite side, you get to a viewpoint looking back down on Impassable Creek, a spectacular vista. 15 or 20 minutes after you've climbed out of the canyon at Impassable Creek, you come to another wonderful, unnamed, small creek where you can fill your water bottle and rest for a much-needed break. The trail continues along, following the edge of the Ilaho Canyon. At times, you have to climb under logs, over logs, or even walk along logs. About halfway between Impassable Creek and Last Chance Creek, you come to a viewpoint overlooking the Ilaho Canyon where you catch a glimpse of Blueberry Falls. When you get to Blueberry Falls, if you look just below the falls and off to the left on a sheer rock cliff, you may catch a glimpse of some mountain goats. Keep in mind at all times that the Stoltmann Wilderness is bear country. You need to hang your food and cook and store food well away from your tent. You may not be fortunate enough to catch a glimpse of the bears, but you'll certainly see signs of them. As you progress along the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route, the character of the forest changes. You start to see more and more yellow cedar and mountain hemlock as you progress up the trail. At Canyon Camp, you can camp right on the edge of the Ilaho Canyon with a view up the canyon and over the surrounding landscape. A few minutes beyond Canyon Camp, you can see this lovely unnamed waterfall if you look across the Ilaho River to the other side. In many areas along the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route, you find small marshes. These areas are favorite places for bears who like to dig up the skunk cabbage roots. The fourth major creek you come to is Last Chance Creek, aptly named because it's your last chance to fill your water bottle before starting to climb up to the 100 Lakes Plateau. Just before you begin the climb up to the 100 Lakes Plateau, and after crossing Last Chance Creek, you come to the grizzly fir, another very large Douglas fir tree. The 100 Lakes Plateau is a 5,000-foot pass between the Ilaho Valley and the Meager Creek Valley. It's an open, expansive area, good country for rambling and exploring. As you near the top of the 100 Lakes Plateau, you start to get views looking back down the valley you've just hiked through. The 100 Lakes Plateau is truly a spectacular area, surrounded on all sides by glaciers. The plateau is a network of hundreds of small ponds and lakes. You can ramble for hours, hiking and exploring, finding something new around every corner. After crossing the 100 Lakes Plateau, you reach the final campsite in the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route. This is Mist Lake Camp, where in the early morning, the lake is engulfed with a low-lying misty cloud. Although the 100 Lakes Plateau is a beautiful area, the insects think so too, so don't forget to bring your bug spray or a bug net. Be sure to plan enough time in your hike to spend at least a day exploring the 100 Lakes Plateau. Shortly beyond Mist Lake Camp, you get your first views of the Meager Creek Valley. From your vantage point at the top of the 100 Lakes Plateau, you can see the extensive clear cuts that stretch down this entire drainage system. After hiking for anywhere from 2 to 4 days along the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route, it's depressing to face this and to descend down the hill back to civilization and back to the clear cuts. You then begin the descent down from the 100 Lakes Plateau to the Meager Creek Car Park. It takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to descend down the route back to your awaiting car. Once you reach the bottom of the slope, the only thing left to do is simply cross the North Fork of Meager Creek to the logging road on the other side. From where your car is parked, or where your friends pick you up, it's only a 4.5-hour drive back to Vancouver. The Ilaho Valley rainforest, through which the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route passes, is scheduled for road building and logging beginning in 1997. Take the time to visit the Stoltmann Wilderness or hike the entire route and see for yourself what is at stake. Please help us and join in the fight to save the Stoltmann Wilderness. Don't let the last wilderness valleys of southwestern BC end up looking like Meager Creek, just another logged-out drainage.
The Randy Stoltmann Wilderness area is named after a young man from West Vancouver, Randy Stoltmann. Stoltmann was a conservationist extraordinaire, an expert photographer. He wrote a number of books. And one of the things he did in 1994 was he looked at the tall tree forest in the Lower Mainland. Now he's seen in this picture actually measuring a great tall tree in the Carmana Valley in the late 80s. But by the mid-90s, he was looking for the remaining wilderness areas in the Lower Mainland, and through studying maps discovered that the largest wilderness area in the Lower Mainland was the 260,000 hectare region in the upper Squamish River systems and upper Lillooet River systems. He produced a report which he handed in to the provincial government in the spring of 1994 recommending this area be preserved. And tragically, Randy Stoltmann was killed in a mountaineering accident a month later. And his friends and associates in the conservation movement went on to work for the preservation of this area, which we call the Randy Stoltmann Wilderness Area in his honor. In February of 1995, Wilderness Committee campaigners took our first trip into the Stoltmann Wilderness. Of course, there was 6 feet of snow on the ground, and we slid down the steep embankment with a raft and crossed the Ilaho River, right where the Ilaho joins the Clendenning Creek. On the other side of the Ilaho River near Clendenning Creek, we ran into our first of many big ancient Douglas firs. Now, the Douglas fir has almost been eliminated, old-growth Douglas fir anyway, from the mainland coast of BC because that's the tree most coveted by the loggers. We soon found that in the Stoltmann Wilderness, there are some of the finest groves of Douglas fir remaining on BC's coast. Now, as spring ripened and the leaves turned green and our explorations went further into the Stoltmann Wilderness, it became abundantly clear that this wilderness place, the Lower Mainland's largest wilderness, is endangered. Everywhere we saw the marks of proposed logging roads and clear cuts right into the heart of the Stoltmann Wilderness, up into the Ilaho Valley. In fact, that spring, International Forest Products began blasting a road up Sims Creek, one of the 4 major valleys of the Stoltmann Wilderness. Now, Sims Creek is a rare, intact wilderness valley. There are only 8 big valleys left in the entire Lower Mainland. Yet in the spring of 1995, International Forest Products began to eliminate the wilderness nature of Sims Creek Valley. As spring ran into summer, more and more activists came to the Stoltmann Wilderness to view the Sims Creek Road building and began to write letters to the provincial government asking that this area be preserved. People were absolutely horrified to see that the provincial government had allowed International Forest Products to blast a roadbed right into the stream and to clear cut right down to the stream bed. This was June of 1995, at the very same time the provincial government was touting its much ballyhooed Forest Practices Code. Here they were in the backwoods, allowing International Forest Products to blast through Sims Creek. Experts from the Sierra Legal Defense Fund came in to assess the damage. They found streams logged over, choked with debris throughout the border area surrounding the Stoltmann Wilderness. By assessing tree stumps in the surrounding clear cuts, the Sierra Legal Defense experts found that the big Douglas firs were over 1,000 years old. This would help us to assess the age of trees within the Stoltmann Wilderness. At the end of the logging road, at the gateway to the Stoltmann Wilderness, we found huge, massive clear cuts, some in excess of 100 hectares. That's clear cuts over 1 kilometer across. Compared to the government propaganda we'd been seeing in the newspaper ads and the TV ads, this really shocked us. As summer progressed, more and more people had heard about the Stoltmann Wilderness and were traveling in to see the area. This is a gathering at a proposed bridge crossing by International Forest Products on the Ilaho River. These people came out to the area, saw the proposed bridge crossing, and began writing letters to government. And eventually, the bridge crossing was canceled. On the northern boundary of the Stoltmann Wilderness, here in Meager Creek Valley, the clear-cuts were just as horrendous as in the Ilaho Valley. It became very clear to us that unless we saved the Stoltmann Wilderness, this would be its fate. And so, with no time to spare, in the summer of 1995, Wilderness Committee activists began to explore the Ilaho Valley in preparation for building and clearing a hiking route so that people could travel through the wilderness rainforests and see this place for themselves. After exploring a route, Wilderness Committee volunteers marked the rough route with flagging tape. Because the area is crisscrossed with deep canyons, some of them 200 feet deep, it took a while to figure out the correct route to take and the correct location for hiking bridges. This is a ford of aptly named Impassable Creek. At various places along the route, you can perch above 200-foot sheer-sided canyon walls. This whole area was overlain with volcanic debris, lava, and ash several millennia ago. And during that time, the main Ilaho River and its side tributaries have cut these spectacular canyons. Throughout that summer, Wilderness Committee volunteers blazed a route across the Hunter Lakes Plateau, which is a maze of mini mountains and lakes and ponds. Literally hundreds of volunteers participated in the hiking route construction camps. They were local people from the Lower Mainland, but they also came from Eastern Canada, the U.S., Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, came from the four corners of the planet to help save the Stoltmann Wilderness. The volunteers carried loppers, which are like long-handled rose pruners. These loppers were used to clear away the branches and the undergrowth, and that's about the only tool the volunteers had to use. And with these loppers, they were able to clear a 28-kilometer-long hiking route, probably the wildest experience in the Lower Mainland. Volunteers quite early on made an amazing discovery. They found the third largest Douglas fir, the Douglas fir with the third greatest girth ever found, 30 feet in circumference. They called it the Ilaho Giant. This tree is probably the survivor of many fires it would have to be to get this big. It will be over 1,000 years old, and because its thick, cork-like, fire-resistant bark has saved it from these fires, it has seen several generations of smaller, weaker trees burn from around it over the centuries. And yet here it is, alive in the Ilaho Valley. All that summer, the volunteers carved a simple pathway through the ancient forests of the Stoltmann Wilderness. But there was trouble. The BC Forest Service said that the Western Canada Wilderness Committee was contravening the new Forest Practices Code. We thought that was a bit of a joke. The Forest Practices Code hadn't stopped big clear-cuts like this from happening, and the Forest Practices Code hadn't stopped International Forest Products from building a logging road right through Sims Creek. Yet the Forest Service was telling us it was illegal to clear this pathway through the forests. CBC camera crew came down to tell the story, and after much negotiation with Forest Service, we found we were indeed allowed to cut the hiking route as long as we didn't call it a trail. So we agreed to live by the new rules We don't call the pathway a trail. We've eliminated the word trail from our vocabulary. And the volunteers continue to snip the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking route through the undergrowth. The Wilderness Committee volunteers thought it was humorous that the BC Forest Service would pressure us over building a hiking pathway through the forest, yet still allowed International Forest Products to take the entire forest away, like in this big clear cut next to the Stoltmann Wilderness. In August of 1995, Western Canada Wilderness Committee held a gathering in the large clear cut next to the beginning of the Stoltmann Wilderness. Several hundred people came to see the clear cuts, to hike the Stoltmann Wilderness hiking trail, and to strategize on how this beautiful wilderness area could be preserved. In Christmas of 1995, the Western Canada Wilderness Committee got the word that International Forest Products was trying to sneak a bridge across the Ilaho River. This would put the Douglas fir forest on the other side in jeopardy. So Wilderness Committee activists got right down to the site and set up camp. We wanted to embarrass International Forest Products into halting construction on this bridge. When we got there, we'd found that International Forest Products had driven heavy equipment across the Ilaho River and installed this bridge abutment. A Rogers TV camera crew came down and filmed the whole episode, showing the heavy equipment tracks going into the river and the new bridge abutment as we worked to get the message out that the Stoltmann was gravely endangered. New Year's Eve, 1995, and the Wilderness Committee activists are down on the Ilaho Road celebrating the Stoltmann Wilderness. By early 1996, hundreds of people had visited the Stoltmann Wilderness, and the pressure to preserve it was really growing. This is a demonstration by UBC students in downtown Vancouver calling for the protection of the entire 260,000 hectare Stoltmann Wilderness. Neighborhood by neighborhood, the Wilderness Committee began to take slideshows around to schools and churches and public venues. We advertised those slideshows by holding banners and signs up in the local neighborhoods so that people would know that the Stoltmann Wilderness slideshow was coming to their neighborhood. Finally, the government began to react, and they reacted by saying that they were not willing to set aside more than 13% of the Lower Mainland as parks and protected areas. We knew if the government sticks to this low ceiling on protection, then the Stoltmann Wilderness will never be protected. We argue that 40% of the wild nature is needed to be protected if we're going to hold on to creatures like grizzly bears or salmon. And so our signs began to reflect our attitude of fighting for 40%. The BC government then moved to strike a special committee. They formed a special committee to hold closed-door meetings on which areas would become parks in the Lower Mainland and which areas would be given over to logging companies like International Forest Products. The Wilderness Committee tried to come in and view these meetings. Sitting down at the table, carving up the new parks, were folks like International Forest Products, the IWA, the mining people, and a few environmental groups, including the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. Essentially, it was a closed-door process, so Wilderness Committee volunteers began camping outside of the meetings, demanding that they be open to the public. Now, this government committee was called the Regional Public Advisory Committee, but there was very little public about it. Try as we might, we couldn't get them to open their doors, even though they were crafting the largest land use plan, the most far-reaching land use plan the Lower Mainland has ever seen. The Western Canada Wilderness Committee is, in fact, the largest organization concerned with wilderness preservation in Western Canada. Our 24,000 members mean that we are a very large voice and have a great deal of knowledge about where parks could be and should be. Yet we were never asked to sit on this government committee. Instead, the government chose government-friendly environmental groups who would toe the party line. By early February of 1996, Wilderness Committee activists had moved their camp to the lawn of the BC legislature. For the BC government, we had some simple demands. We wanted the RPAC, the Regional Public Advisory Committee, open to the public. We asked that there be open house public meetings in the communities of the Lower Mainland so that people in the villages and towns and cities of the Lower Mainland could tell RPAC where their favorite swimming beaches were, where their favorite hiking trails, their favorite forests were, so that choosing a park system for the Lower Mainland would be a park system developed by the public. We also called on the government of British Columbia to preserve the Lower Mainland's largest wild area, the Stoltmann Wilderness. We brought our tents. We knew it might take a while. We didn't think it would take that long because we were just asking for our basic rights, the right to public participation. Well, we were wrong. Time dragged on. Days and nights our volunteers camped on the lawn of the BC legislature. What kept us there? Well, we'd been in the Stoltmann Wilderness. We'd seen the grizzly bear prints in the sandbars, and we'd seen the cougar prints and heard the wolves howling at night. We knew how special this place was, and we believed that eventually the British Columbia government would allow public meetings on this very special area and other Lower Mainland parks. And so the month of February dragged on. Wilderness Committee activists remained on the lawn through snow and sleet, night and day, and still the government didn't agree to holding open public meetings on the new proposed parks for the Lower Mainland. Still we hung in there. Then things started getting weird. The legislature's security told us that we could no longer have a tent on the lawn, so we decided to float our tent above the lawn. We had no intention of leaving, but things were beginning to look a little desperate. All in all, we were there for 2 months, and at the end of 2 months, it was worse than desperate. It was downright goofy. We didn't know what else we could do. We'd been on the legislature lawn for 2 months with a simple request. Please hold open house public meetings on the new proposed parks for the Lower Mainland. And in the end, it failed. We never did get the public meetings. The government dug its heels in. They would decide on the new parks for the Lower Mainland behind closed doors. And so we left and went back to the Stoltmann Wilderness. By the spring of 1996, we were restringing the hiking bridges and preparing the trail for another season of hiking. Throughout the spring and summer of 1996, the Wilderness Committee volunteers were back at it, working to complete the 28-kilometer hiking route up the Illaho Valley and across the Hunter Lakes Plateau to the Meeker Creek Valley. High up on the Hunter Lakes Plateau, which is 5,000 feet above sea level, the volunteers stacked up piles of stones called cairns to mark the way across the rolling plateau. In June of 1996, we discovered International Forest Products up to its old tricks. They were blasting a new logging road 3 kilometers up into the Illaho Valley, but they'd given no notice. When we looked at the Forest Practices Code regulations, we saw that companies like International Forest Products, by law, have to give a 60-day notice before they push inroads like this, so the public has a chance to look at the plans and comment. This didn't happen, so the Western Canada Wilderness Committee took International Forest Products to court. That case is still pending. It's our contention that this kind of road building is illegal and should not be allowed. In July of 1996, the artists arrived, over 100 of them in 5 separate camping expeditions deep into the Stoltmann Wilderness. These artists had come to paint and sculpt and draw the Stoltmann Wilderness. An art auction will be held in the spring of 1997, where people can come and see the art, and the money raised from the sale of the paintings and drawings and sculptures will go towards the continuing fight to preserve the Stoltmann Wilderness. By November of 1996, Wilderness Committee volunteers were installing suspension bridges across some of the bigger side streams. These bridges utilized an innovative new design that uses 10-foot ladder sections bolted together and then suspended from a rope suspension system to create a mini Lionsgate Bridge. Also at this time, the provincial government announced its final decision on new parks for the Lower Mainland. Only 20% of the Stoltmann Wilderness was announced to be protected. The RPAC closed-door process had resulted in giving 80% of the Stoltmann Wilderness over to industrial users like International Forest Products. Western Canada Wilderness Committee vows to fight on until the entire Stoltmann Wilderness area, the Lower Mainland's largest remaining wild place, is protected. We hope you'll join us.